The irises in the garden had withered, so I cut off their dead branches. Kyle, however, stormed into my greenhouse like a madman and destroyed the flowers I had painstakingly nurtured. He was smug and cold, dared to touch my mother's things, even a tiny bit, and you'll pay 100-fold. Seeing that I didn't speak, he repeated, sooner or later, I'll make you get out of this manor. Looking at this child I had taken care of for 7 years, I felt no anger or disappointment, only immense weariness. Fine, as you wish. A drop of blood dripped from my fingertip, where I'd been cut while struggling with Kyle for the shears. I didn't have time to tend to the wound. Instead, I bent down. In the midst of the shattered petals and broken leaves, I sifted out the remaining roots. These orchids had accompanied me to this foreign land, delicate yet resilient, weathering 7 autumns and winters. But now they had completely withered in this ordinary spring. Seeing that I wasn't launching into my usual lecture, Kyle looked slightly guilty. He straightened his back and said in fluent English, "Don't play the victim. You deserve this. You took my mother's things, so you should suffer." I steadied myself and looked up. "Where did you hear that?" The 12-year-old boy possessed both the handsomeness of a Westerner and the elegance of an Easterner. "Mind your own business." Those light blue eyes glared at me for a moment before he turned and strode away. In the evening, I tended to the wound on my hand. Someone knocked on the door. "Mrs. Locke, Mr. Locke wants to see you." I nodded, indicating that I understood. In the study, the man exuded an air of noble refinement, silver strands of hair occasionally stirred by the breeze. "I heard Kyle was angry today?" I stood at the study door, silent. The man crossed his legs, his expression languid and aristocratic, his long fingers lightly tapping the desk. "He's just a child." However, the man's soft voice turned sharp, almost cold. "You've been here for 7 years. You should know what you can touch and what you can't." I remained silent. Even if those irises were just a few seeds scattered by the master without intention, they were not mine to dispose of as I pleased. I had no energy to argue at that moment, and instinctively obeyed. "Yes." The icy atmosphere eased slightly. The man behind the desk spoke, "Come here." I moved my feet and walked over, but for the first time I felt a resistance to that invasive kiss. Arlen's expression darkened slightly, his tone displeased. "Don't forget your position." "What position?" I was bewildered. "You are my wife." The man's voice was low and husky, his breath caressing my ear. I then remembered that it had been 7 years since I was forced by my family to marry into this family after my sister's death. I still held such an insignificant role. It was just that the master of the house deeply mourned his late wife. So I, this nominal second wife, was just seen as a housekeeper in everyone's eyes. I smoothed out my rumpled dress and took a step back. "Mr. Locke, I have something I want to say." Arlen frowned slightly. "The contract between the 2 families is expiring. I think it's time for me to leave." Arlen said coldly, still angry with Kyle. "It's just a few flowers. I've asked people to find some more white swan orchids, and they'll be delivered later." It wasn't about those poor flowers. I stared at the silver-haired man in front of me and shook my head. 7 years have passed, the contract automatically terminates, and I think I should leave. The Locks are a well-known Asian American family in Rosewood. Years ago, Arlen and Wendy G., the daughter of the G family, fell in love, allowing the G family to climb up to this family. Later, Wendy died of illness, and the G family, under the guise of taking care of the child and their old relationship, signed a 7-year marriage contract. Arlen. Arlen's cold expression softened. "You want to renew the contract?" "No, I think it's time for a divorce." As I spoke, I took out a letter. I've written down all the remaining handover matters on it. Realizing that I wasn't just throwing a tantrum, Arlen's face darkened. "Wendy Locke. I don't like people joking." I smiled wryly. "Mr. Locke, if you're worried about the manor's affairs, I've already found a replacement housekeeper. Kyle has blood ties with you. 7 years. Can you just leave?" Arlen's voice was gloomy. I had already turned to walk towards the door. Hearing this, I turned half my face. "But he hates me the most, doesn't he?" My mother's cries from back then were still vivid in my mind. He's only 5 years old, and he's lost his mother. And he's living in such a wolf den. How will he survive in the future? Perhaps I was too foolish. Perhaps I longed for family too much. After meeting that child's clear amber eyes, I still softened. I'm your aunt, and your relative. The tender little dumpling ran into my arms. At that time, I never anticipated how much that baby-faced child would hate me in the future. I still couldn't leave the manor. Not just because the handover hadn't been completed, but also because my mother, Mrs. G, came to find me and knelt before me. If you leave, what will happen to the G family? What will happen to your father? Her delicate makeup was smeared with tears. But I seemed indifferent. In Rosewood, the G family relied on the Locks to have their current status. For this benefit, 7 years ago, she had knelt like this. Back then, I was at a loss, and eventually married in. I helped her up. The ground is cold. Mrs. G wiped away her tears. I knew you were a sensible child. In any case, blood ties cannot be severed. You take good care of Kyle, and our G family will also have a place in Rosewood. I helped her walk out. The blonde-haired and blue-eyed maid saw us and gave a contemptuous and mocking smile. There's no way she'll leave the Locke family. My God, I lost the bet again. She tried every means to marry in and stayed for 7 years, shameless. Who has ever treated her like a Mrs. Locke except herself? I was used to these gossiping remarks. In the first 6 months after I arrived, my Mandarin wasn't good, and some people even mocked and ridiculed me in front of my face, but I remained unmoved. After sending Mrs. G to the door, she was still chattering away. I heard that Arlen's affairs are causing trouble again. 7 years isn't enough for you to understand a man's personality? You should be smarter and learn how to capture a man's heart. If you had even half of Wendy's qualities, I wouldn't have to sigh. She didn't say anything, but I understood. After she left, I asked, "Are father and brother doing well?" Mrs. G rolled her eyes and sighed. Thanks to Mr. Locke's care, they have enough to eat so they don't have to worry themselves gray. I said lightly, but every day I'm here is not good. No one can take care of me. In the eyes of the G family, I was a button to maintain their wealth and glory. In the eyes of outsiders, I was a member of the G family who coveted power and shamelessly married in, a housekeeper who would handle things with a smile even if Arlen's mistress came to the door. In Arlen's eyes, I was a dispensable stranger. Because of a few resemblances to his late wife, I was able to get close to him. In Kyle's eyes, I was a scheming woman who wanted to replace his mother. Every day, I had to deal with all kinds of people. I could be any role, but never myself. I will leave. As for what happens to the G family, I lowered my voice. Can't rely on me, an illegitimate daughter, right? So you know everything. Mrs. G's face became tense. I just smiled without saying a word. At first, I didn't know. I didn't know why my brother and sister could go abroad, but I, at the age of 5, was left behind, with only an old nanny to take care of me, until I was needed and then returned to my family. I didn't know why no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get an interested look from my family. I also wanted to be loved tenderly by my mother like my sister Wendy. I also wanted to shoulder my father's expectations and responsibilities like my brother. No matter how much I did, no one cared. Until recent years, I discovered clues, explored step by step, and then I knew. I was just Mr. G's illegitimate daughter, so Mrs. G hated me, and the family was unwilling to accept me. But they didn't starve me to death, and still raised me to adulthood, which was considered fulfilling their obligation. So I didn't ruin this 7-year contract and damage the relationship between the two families. What I've done is enough. The surprise and amazement on Mrs. G's face turned into angry coldness. Then you should be clear that if you leave the Locke family and leave the G family, you are nothing. I turned around. Mrs. G, it's more important to care about your own future. Then I turned and walked back. I detoured to the garden. The original mess had been cleaned up, and the newly delivered white swan orchids were unfurling their branches and leaves. The shape was exactly the same as the ones I planted. I stepped over, dug out the seeds from the soil, and replanted them in small flower pots. Back in my room, before I could go upstairs, I saw that the door was wide open. My suitcase was lying at the door, and the packed things were scattered, with even some footprints on them. Holding the small flower pot, I stopped. Kyle walked out of the room and stood on the stairs, looking down with a condescending gaze. He kicked the suitcase down the stairs. I avoided it, and the suitcase tumbled down the stairs with a crash. "Didn't you say you wanted to get out? I'm here to help you. What do you Mandarin speakers like to say? Playing hard to get? Do you really think my father will fall for this?" The teenager's expression was arrogant, and the disgust in his eyes was undisguised. I walked up the stairs, approaching step by step, and stood in front of him. He said nervously, "What do you want to do?" The 12-year-old's back was still too thin, and he was scared back half a step by my approaching figure. Looking at the immature face in front of me, I asked, "Why do you hate me so much?" It was clear that when he was little, this child was very attached to me. I accompanied him through the pain of losing his mother, taught him Mandarin, accompanied him in his studies, and cooked for him personally. But as he grew up, he became more and more distant from me, and even stubbornly believed that I was only good to him for the sake of benefits. "Don't you know?" Kyle said impatiently. I continued, "Did Gigi say something?" I understood her thoughts. She wanted to use me to win over the Locke family, but she didn't want Kyle to be too close to me and lose control. Kyle's eyes flickered. I confirmed the answer and said, "A few words from others can disrupt your thinking. You are indeed far from the air standards your father set. But you're a child, so I don't blame you, but I won't forgive you either." Kyle glared at me disdainfully. "If you didn't have those dirty thoughts in your heart, you wouldn't have come here to enjoy the status and treatment that should have belonged to my mother." I never wanted those things. My tone became heavier. Kyle said contemptuously, "That's because you know that in my father's heart, you will never be able to surpass my mother." Looking at the child's triumphant eyes, my tone was cold. "Kyle Locke, I don't owe you anything. But I am indeed very unsuccessful for raised such an ungrateful child. But it doesn't matter. I think we'll never meet again. Indeed, children are the most annoying, even if they are raised by you." I stepped over the clothes scattered on the ground, took out my important documents from the drawer, and walked out holding the flower pot. Behind me came an unwilling roar. "If you go out, don't ever think about coming back to Rose Manor. No one will care about your childish tricks like running away from home." My steps didn't stop. No one saw me off. Only the maid's measuring gazes and constant whispers. "Is she really leaving? Probably thinks she's not valued by Mr. Locke and the young master, so she's putting on a show. I guess she'll be back in a few days." What a pity. I thought she was a smart person. There's never a shortage of women by Mr. Locke's side. Outside Rose Manor, the sunshine was warm. Another housekeeper by Arlen's side stood at the gate, smiling. "Mr. Locke is very busy and probably doesn't have time to deal with Mrs. Locke's emotions. Please enjoy the next few days and relax. The money has already been transferred to your account." Those lonely dark nights had passed. I didn't turn my head, but walked out into the dazzling sunshine. I thought I would never come back here again. I found a place to cancel everything related to the identity of Wendy Locke, including bank accounts, phone cards, etc. According to the original plan, I boarded the nearest flight back to China. The plane rose, and clouds swept past. Holding the flower pot, I saw the pale blue sky, where the moon was beginning to show its outline. Landing in China, I returned to my hometown. I got my new ID card. It said Amy G. From now on, there would be no more Wendy Locke, who was not in control of her own life. There would only be the free Amy G. The place where I grew up was Riverton. But I didn't plan to go back, because it made me feel like I was still living under the surveillance of the G family. I went to Willow Creek. It was a water town with spring-like weather all year round, perfect for growing flowers. And I had learned about some investment trends by observing Arlen, and the money I secretly invested in a few stocks was enough for me to live out the rest of my life in the small town. I bought a house with a front yard and planted the flowers. These rhizomes had traveled a long distance with me and were injured. I stayed at home and bought a lot of books on growing flowers to study, and also consulted many experts online. After a month, the remaining roots showed signs of life again. I was overjoyed, and at this time, the annual orchid flower show in Willow Creek arrived. With nothing better to do, I went to take a look and met several like-minded friends. Some were older, and when they heard that I could grow white swan orchids in the previous environment, they were quite shocked and called it unbelievable, until they saw the photos and were all impressed. The sudden leisure made me unaccustomed, but I cherished it very much. Thinking that I had nothing to do, I also invested in a flower cultivation base. On weekdays, in addition to growing flowers, I was occasionally pulled by these old friends to be a consultant, which could be regarded as passing the time. This day, I had just come out of the base. There was a missed call on my phone. I answered it, but there was no sound on the other end. I said hello a few times, but couldn't hear any echo, so I hung up the phone casually. In the evening, perhaps because it was a weekday, the streets were a bit deserted. I went into a small shop, ordered a few special dishes, and poured myself a small glass of wine, sipping it slowly. Outside the shop, the sky was dyed red by the setting sun, and the red glow sprinkled on the blue stone slabs, and the warm light open on the ground, which was particularly dazzling. Perhaps after a few glasses of wine, I felt a little tipsy. In the backlight, a tall figure looked familiar. I shook my head. My alcohol tolerance wasn't bad, but perhaps because I rarely drank during my days at Rose Manor. I was a little drunk. In a trance, I almost thought I saw Arland. Then I laughed. How could he come to such a small place to look for me? But that figure was getting closer and closer to me. The black outline gradually became clear. Silver hair, blue eyes, a face blessed by the heavens, noble and indifferent. Wendy Locke, come home. It wasn't until those slender hands grasped my wrist that I shuddered and came back to my senses. Arland Locke, he actually found me? There was no reason for this, just as I believed that humans would not be interested in ants on the ground for no reason. After the contract ended, it was natural for me to disappear. Moreover, I had said goodbye to him before I left. There was no reason for Arland to look for me. I forced myself to calm down quickly. Who are you? What do you want to do? Those blue eyes stared at me, with undercurrents surging. Wendy Locke, you've been throwing a tantrum for a month, that's enough. Kyle is still waiting for you to come home. When you're not home, he refuses to eat the chef's food. The charity gala next month also needs you to prepare. I took the opportunity to break free from his grip. My name is Amy G. I don't know what Wendy you're talking about. I thought, as long as I didn't admit to the identity of Wendy Locke, no one could force me into anything that was associated with this identity. You're called Amy? The light in the man's eyes was as deep as an unfathomable cold pool. I nodded, not revealing a single emotional flaw. How bizarre. Wendy Locke, do I look like a fool? Arland's eyes were dark and unclear, and his tall figure blocked my only way out. I became a little angry and deliberately raised my voice. What do you want to do to me? A big man deliberately blocking me? I said I'm not the person you know. Hearing the commotion, the owner of the restaurant and other customers also stood up. Do you know each other? I insisted. I don't know him. I didn't. Expect such a handsome young man to try to trick a little girl? Let's go, or we'll call the police. Others surrounded Arland, saying one thing after another. He frowned, but unfortunately, his Mandarin was very bad and was ignored by others. I took the opportunity to leave the restaurant in a hurry, and my heart finally breathed a sigh of relief. Turning my head, I saw through the transparent window that Arland's face was gloomy and he was surrounded in place, gradually fading away in the dim sky. I found it funny and saw him in such an embarrassed state for the first time. I hummed a song and went back. Across a road, I saw from afar that 2 teams of bodyguards were standing at the door of my house. A black car was parked at the gate, flashing its lights when it saw me. Mrs. Locke. The leading bodyguard stepped forward and politely raised his hand, blocking my way back. I had no choice but to walk forward. The car window lowered, revealing Kyle's immature face. He gritted his teeth. My father personally asked you to come back. You must be very proud. Consider your purpose achieved. Another car drove up from afar. I glanced at another pair of gloomy blue eyes inside. My thoughts were still too naive. Even if I didn't admit it, they would pester me relentlessly. Let's go in and talk. My face became indifferent, and I took out the key from my bag. With a snap, the orange lights illuminated the warmly decorated living room. The room was filled with a faint scent of orchids. I went to the sofa and sat down first. Arland and Kyle walked in soon after. Are you willing to admit it now? Arland's voice was very calm. Kyle stood behind him, looking angry at me, but kept his mouth shut and didn't say much. Now apologize to your mother, Arland said lightly. I was a little surprised. I had never asked Kyle to call me mother, and others had tacitly allowed me to have no such qualification. Kyle's mouth seemed to be stuck together until Arland's heavy gaze pressed down, and then he reluctantly opened his mouth. I'm sorry, mother, Arland said lightly. I was a little surprised. I had never asked Kyle to call me mother, and others had tacitly allowed me to have no such qualification. Kyle's mouth seemed to be stuck together until Arland's heavy gaze pressed down, and then he reluctantly opened his mouth. I'm sorry, mother. I did take care of Kyle as my own child. But as he gradually grew up, I realized more and more clearly that we were not mother and son, and I had long lost this desire. I said, what exactly do you want to do by coming to me? Arland looked around the room in an indifferent tone, and then opened his mouth. Since Kyle has admitted his mistake, let's end this matter. I know you're really angry. Amy, we've been looking for you for a long time, in many places. But I hope that next time, don't use this way of running away from home. Arland's tone had no ups and downs, but his attitude was very sincere. He stood up and took the initiative to extend his hand for the first time. This was the first time I heard him acknowledge my identity. Looking at this slender palm in front of me, another scene appeared in my mind. I was hosting a banquet for the first time. Because I was not skilled, I was inevitably targeted. Even worse, I was tripped and fell heavily in front of everyone. The faces of those wearing gorgeous clothes were different, and their languages were either calm or surprised. But no one meant to help me. My face was flushed, and just then, Arland walked past with people. He was wearing an elegant suit, his lips were pale, and he swept over me on the ground. What's wrong? I subconsciously thought he was going to help me. I raised my hand, as if the next moment that hand would reach out and pull me up from the ground. But in the end, after learning what happened, he just said oh indifferently and walked past. I looked at his back, endured the pain in my knees, took off my 8-inch high heels, and stood up barefoot. But this lukewarm attitude was like a weather vane. After that, I had been living very hard. And because I had the title of Mrs. Locke, I had to handle all kinds of things and couldn't slack off. Gradually, I also learned to be sophisticated and had some of my own connections. I belatedly realized that even if I fell, I could stand up on my own. I came back to my senses and subconsciously pushed away the hand in front of me. Wendy Locke is your wife, but Amy G is not. I've already made my point very clear. I won't go back. Arland frowned. Kyle also opened his mouth. You have to go back to take care of me. I looked at the child's face. You hate me, why do you have to have me go back to take care of you? Kyle grabbed the corner of my clothes tightly. Because I only eat the food you make. Also, I need your help with my homework. And I've already apologized, why don't you accept it? Kyle's taste was picky. Perhaps it was that bit of bloodline that made him particularly picky about Western food. Only the Mandarin food that I had improved could suit his taste. I pulled away his hand and said calmly, I came to your house to repay the G family's kindness in raising me. Now it's paid back. If you have any requirements for food, tell the cook. I'm not a chef. Kyle's face was blank, as if he hadn't expected me to refuse to go back. Arland's deep eyes narrowed slightly. Then what compensation do you want? I shook my head. I invited you in just to say, don't bother me in the future. I had given 7 years of my youth to these two. I didn't ask for anything in return. Fate had pushed me onto this path. Arlen's deep affection was not wrong, so even though I had a hard time at the manor, I never thought of blaming him. All of this was the G family's greed. I began to ask them to leave. If there's nothing else, please leave. I want to rest. It's just a few flowers. D. Didn't father already return them to you? Kyle couldn't help shouting angrily. They always thought I was throwing a tantrum because of those few flowers. I found it absurd. Everyone knew how much I cherished those flowers. But they always thought it was insignificant. Yes, they are unimportant flowers to you, but not to me. But I hope that in the future, you can treat me like those flowers, unimportant. I pushed the two out the door, and then locked it. I didn't care when the people outside left. I went to wash up and went to bed. Before going to bed, an idea floated through my mind. Should I leave Willow Creek? Then I denied it. I didn't want to give up my current life because of them. Moreover, even if I went to other places, it would only be a matter of time before they found me. The next day, I went to Old G's house as promised. This was a close friend I met at the flower show. I helped him look at the wilting golden curl camellia in the garden and asked a few questions. Old G was finally relieved. He looked at me and stroked his white beard with satisfaction. It's good that I met you. My flowers can still be saved. Amy, although you don't have a related degree, I believe in your ability. You can be more than just a consultant. My son has formed a team dedicated to biodiversity protection and sincerely invites you to join. He handed me an invitation letter and introduced me to his son's team. I said I understood, but I was a little hesitant looking at the invitation letter. I just like to grow flowers. I'm afraid I can't do more professional things and help him. Old G laughed. Amy, you're too humble. I'm just worried that their team is dedicated to going to Tibet to make up for the lack of Tibetan seeds in the world's germplasm resource bank. I'm afraid such a life of constant travel would be hard for you. So it's okay if you don't agree. Thank you. Then I'll think about it carefully. I left Old G's house with the Invita tie-in letter. I was a little absent-minded all the way. Old G had analyzed the pros and cons for me, and his attitude was also very sincere. But should I try it? I got in the car and went home. Absent-mindedly, I looked up and saw unfamiliar scenery outside the car window. Taking a closer look, it was indeed the road back home, but the familiar road was lined with flowers, and the colorful flowers swayed in the wind, with a fragrant smell. I got out of the car. Two familiar figures were indeed waiting at the door. Arlen was wearing a black trench coat, with a cold temperament. Kyle was kicking a stone, bored. He cheered up when he saw me. The two were out of place with the surrounding environment, but their eyes looked at me in unison. Amy, do you like these? Arlen pushed Kyle aside. He stepped forward and said unnaturally, sorry, is this apology sincere? I looked at his face, and although it was awkward, I could easily see that his eyes were red-rimmed. I said, okay, I accept. Kyle eagerly raised his head. Really? Does that mean we can go home? Arlen's brow furrowed. I laughed. No one is stopping you from going home. With that, I took out my keys to enter the house. Kyle was puzzled. What about you? I glanced at him, baffled. This is my home. Arlen's expression became subtle and complex. He said, if you truly mind Kyle's attitude, you can discipline him better in the future. I didn't say anything, just hurried inside and slammed the door shut. Father and son stood outside, looking at each other. And I wrote a reply to Old G, still declining the offer. Old G expressed his understanding. However, unexpectedly, that evening, Old G's son, Jason, replied with a very long email. The email explained the initial intentions and significance behind their endeavor. Although I had never met him, I could still sense his sincerity. The resolve I had about refusing began to waver. After 3 days of contemplation, I was ultimately moved by Jason's sincerity and agreed to join the team. He told me that the team would assemble in 2 weeks, after which we would perhaps step into Tibet, into that vast land. Before then, I could prepare. I didn't have much to take. I just needed to make arrangements for my orchids, sending them to old G's house to be cared for. If there were any other troubles, it would probably be Arland and Kyle. I knew Arland wouldn't stay away from the Rockefeller family for too long. The burdens he carried were much heavier than I imagined. But I didn't expect that almost half a month would pass and Arland would still be here with Kyle, with no intention of returning. They even bought the house next door, becoming my neighbors. Sometimes, I would run into them in the morning. Arland's tone was indifferent, without much change. Kyle, however, had changed a lot. He restrained his former animosity towards me, and his blonde hair and blue eyes made his small face look particularly endearing. Sometimes, when he saw that I was ignoring them, he would lie down at the yard gate and call to me from afar. "Wendy Locke, when are we going home? Can I still have your sweet and sour ribs? Wendy Locke, you said before that we were family." I know I was wrong about being angry. The child's voice was pitiful. Even neighbors who saw it came to mediate. "This is your son, right? He's so cute." There's no room for grudges between a mother and son. I subconsciously wanted to explain that this wasn't my child. But Kyle nodded in agreement. "Mommy, I really know I was wrong." I was momentarily speechless. Kyle didn't hate me for replacing his mother so much after all. What surprised me even more was that Arland was even more doting on his child than I had imagined. Perhaps years of care had made Kyle unable to let go of me, but even the always serious and cold Arland was willing to accompany Kyle and endure cold looks in this foreign land? Despite the surprise, I didn't have much emotion. Right now, I was not only busy cramming some botany knowledge, but also exercising, otherwise I wouldn't be able to withstand the high-altitude climate. However, the frequency with which I bumped into Arland was too high. Sometimes it was in the morning, and a figure would suddenly appear beside me during my morning run. Sometimes it was at noon, and I didn't know who had sent dinner. Sometimes, when I was studying related botanical knowledge by lamplight at night, I would receive a text message from an unfamiliar number, advising me to go to bed early. They seemed to know that I didn't want to see them, and didn't show up much. But the constant stream of things being sent and the intrusive details made it hard to ignore. This transformation, which overturned the past, surprised me too much. When had Arland ever done these caring things? One night, I inadvertently passed by the yard next door and heard Arland talking to a strange man. "Is what we've done so far not enough? Don't worry, Mr. Feelings are mysterious, but I'm sure that after spending so many years with you and young master, Mrs. will definitely feel compassion." So these actions that would change things were Arland being taught to do them by someone else. My first reaction was, what benefits could I still offer? But on closer thought, there was nothing worth the Rockefeller family had caring about. I had one answer left, but I couldn't be sure. More importantly, I didn't like Arland. In my eyes, he was more like a synonym for coldness. The way he looked at me was no different from the way he looked at those flowers and plants. The only time there was a change was when I accidentally broke into Wendy's room. I was so surprised that I didn't retreat immediately. The room was filled with many of Wendy's belongings. The man appeared to be unconcerned about feelings on the surface, but he had kept this room so perfectly intact. I turned my head and met Arland's gloomy face. He coldly warned me, "Who all owed you to come in here?" Later, I was punished to go to the storage room. At the time, I didn't feel much sadness, just envy. So there really was such sincere emotion in the world. Such precious love was like the flowers I carefully cared for. Fragile, but therefore all the more precious. Later on, I had learned to be slick, figured out Arland's bottom line, took good care of Kyle, and managed the Rockefeller household properly. My relationship with Arland became a little closer. He gradually accepted me. I followed him to learn how to handle things, guiding his relationship with Kyle. Occasionally, when father and son turned back at the same time, those identical blue eyes under the light would look at me, and I couldn't help but feel a flutter in my heart. I knew that this stirring of feelings was shameful, but I couldn't control it. An obedient and sensible child, a husband with a high position and great power. In the dream of power and wealth, this was the sweetest nourishment. Until Arland's lover came to the door. I saw Arland embrace the woman and kiss her passionately. But after noticing me, he turned to reveal a cold gaze. Just yesterday, he had praised my chicken soup for being delicious. This one look made me feel as if I had fallen into an ice cellar. I was at a loss. But the housekeeper of the manor half-warned and taught me how to deal with these things so skillfully and habitually, shattering my beautiful dream. So, even after Wendy's death, Arlen's lovers had never stopped. Everyone said he was infatuated with his deceased wife. But this infatuation that could embrace other women made me see the huge difference between Arlen and me. From then on, I restrained all thoughts that shouldn't be there, guarding my psychological bottom line extremely well. In countless moments of being neglected, in countless moments of being provoked and made things difficult by others, in countless moments of realizing that I was nothing more than dispensable. I was extremely grateful for this one thing. I don't love him. I saw my days at Rose Manor more as a job. I put in all my time and energy, but I put more of my emotions into cultivating orchids. Everything, until the contract ended. I had packed all my luggage for departure. The day before I left, Jason returned to Willow Creek, and Old G called me to eat. Entering the familiar courtyard, as expected, I saw a handsome and bright-eyed man. I thought that people who were obsessed with plants were either quiet or introverted. But Jason was very talkative, and the atmosphere at the meal was very harmonious. With him there, it dispelled many of my doubts about the trip. After the meal, he sent me home. Before getting out of the car at the destination, he said, "Wait a moment." Then he took a gift box from the back seat of the car. I was a little uneasy. Did I need to give a gift when meeting for the first time? He smiled. "I saw on your account that today is your birthday, so I prepared a small gift. Don't take it to heart." I took the box, feeling a little complicated. I didn't celebrate my birthday much, so even I had forgotten that today was my birthday. After thanking him, I walked towards the small yard. As soon as I stepped inside, a series of lights suddenly lit up in the yard. 2 figures, one large and one small, sat in front of the door. At this moment, Jason's car hadn't left yet. Through the car window, he saw the scene. Seeing me stunned, he kindly reminded me, "Do you need my help?" I came back to my senses and shook my head. He nodded, considerately not asking any more questions. "If you need any help, contact me." The car drove away. Arlen's face was gloomy. "Who is he?" "Wendy Locke. How can there be other men around you?" I was no longer the Wendy Locke in the manor who was obedient, sensible, and considerate. I glanced around casually. The yard was decorated very warmly, with gifts piled up at the door and a heart made of flowers on the ground. My private affairs are none of Mr. Arlen's business. Kyle held the gift, feeling a little wronged. "We came to celebrate your birthday." I found it a little funny. In all these years, is this the first time I've had a birthday? "Thank you, but I don't need these things." I wanted to walk towards the room, but Arlen grabbed my arm. His voice was low and hoarse. "I'm going back tomorrow." "Then bon voyage," I answered, looking into his eyes. In those blue eyes, there was pride, sadness, struggle, and disbelief. But in the end, everything was suppressed. "Wendy Locke, I did neglect you a bit before. But after doing so much, can't I make you feel better?" Doing so much? Was he referring to sending food, gifts, or the inexplicable entanglement? I tried to be calm. "Arlen, no one is moved by things they don't need. I think that's how I was to you before. You should go back." Kyle also lost his usual spirited look, tightly grabbing the corner of my clothes. "No, I won't be angry with you anymore. I listened to what others said. You were good to me, and I felt like you were using me, so I didn't want to admit it, which is why I hated you." Kyle's voice became lower and lower, and tears fell down his face. I wiped the tears from the boy's face and said lightly, "You're just used to it. Soon you'll know that your life doesn't need me." "No, that's not how it is," Kyle said, his eyes red. "You were the one who coaxed me to sleep when I had nightmares. You knew I was unhappy and would do homework with me. I remember everything. I was just being stubborn. Don't ignore me." Arlen's voice was calm, but it couldn't hide the undercurrent. Wendy Locke, we're family. I'll make up for the things we missed before. I won't miss the past anymore, and I won't make you sad again. From today on, our family will have a completely different life. If Kyle's regret was because of family, because of growing up together, then Arlen's sudden surge of love made me feel a little inexplicable. For example, he had never said such a long speech to me before. Not to mention analyzing his inner thoughts. I was complex. Mr. Arland, maybe it's just that I've been by your side for too long. Actually, I'm not as important as you think. Could long-term dependence really turn into love? Arlen's silver hair shone in the night sky. He looked at me and said seriously, no, you're very important. I was too arrogant and unwilling to admit it. Care doesn't create feelings, but what makes me feel is you, Wendy Locke, a special soul. I shook my head. Sorry, I don't like you. Arlen's face gradually turned pale. How is that possible? It's true. I looked down at Kyle. I taught you when you were little that people should keep their word. So I won't hate you, and I won't be sad about what you've done. It's just that I can never represent the past me to forgive you. After saying that, I ignored their reactions and pushed the door open and went inside. The door was slammed shut. I walked to the balcony in a daze. There was knocking on the door outside, and then the knocking gradually weakened. I didn't sleep all night. After dawn, I went out with my luggage. Two tired figures were sitting outside the door, seemingly just falling asleep. I tiptoed, not wanting to disturb them. After closing the door, I got into the car. I had lived here for less than a year. Now I was leaving again to head to a distant place. 3 years later. The bell hasn't rung yet, and the moon is leaning against the temple. This place is not desolate or lonely, but extraordinarily magnificent. I carried my backpack and walked with everyone over ridges, searching for plants in this vast land. To date, we have collected over 1,000 kinds of plants and over 4 million seeds each. Our footprints have covered the Tibetan Plateau, just to leave these genetic treasures behind. And during this time, I successfully passed the entrance exam and became an ecology PhD student, a classmate of Jason. My skin has become darker, but my eyes are more determined. Passing the temple, Jason handed me water. Let's prepare to go down the mountain. Saying that, he went to greet the other companions. Everyone has worked hard during this time. Afterwards, we can rest well for a while. We walked down, prayer flags fluttering. In a sea of bright colors, I saw unique blue. For the past 3 years, I have always inadvertently seen this blue. From afar, fleeting. Seeing me distracted, Jason grabbed me in time. There's a rock in front. What are you looking at? I came back to my senses and smiled. It's nothing, I saw a passerby. They looked around, but didn't see anyone. But I walked lightly towards the front. The unique songs of the herders came to my ears. Here, the soul finds its resting place.